The girl stumbled from the mesquite thicket, blood painting her leg and dust clogging every ragged breath. She collapsed 10 paces from Ruth's fence line, body curled like a wounded fawn. No sound, just the distant sigh of wind through prairie grass and the creak of the gate swinging loose. Ruth Larkspur didn't call out. She stayed behind the post, finger resting near the hammer of the old Colt hanging at her hip. Too still, too quiet. Nothing crawled from the girl's shadow. No rider, no breath of pursuit. Just that scorched silence that meant something was wrong. She stepped forward slowly, boots crunching brittle earth. A hawk screeched high above, circling once, then veering toward the canyons. The girl's eyes fluttered open as Ruth knelt beside her. Brown, wild and wide. Terror sharpened her jaw. Blood crusted the edge of her buckskin tunic. The wound barely more than a graze, but fresh. Recent. Ruth touched the girl's wrist, burning with fever. "Don't move," Ruth murmured. "Ain't gonna hurt you." The girl didn't understand, but she flinched at the voice, tried to rise, and collapsed again. Something flickered at the edge of the butte. Ruth turned sharply. Only grass and shadow. No movement, but her gut twisted tight. She lifted the girl in her arms, light as kindling, and crossed the yard with one eye fixed on the horizon. The cabin door groaned as it opened. Inside, the air was thick with old wood smoke and faint lavender from the dried bundles her husband once hung. She laid the girl on the cot and fetched water from the barrel. When she returned, the girl had dragged herself upright, hand hovering near the knife Ruth kept by the bed. Ruth didn't move. "You touch that steel, I won't stop you," she said plainly, setting the tin cup on the floor between them. "But you won't get far bleeding like a stuck calf." A long silence. Then the girl looked at the cup, reached for it with trembling fingers, and drank deep. Later, Ruth sat beside the fire, watching her guests sleep. The girl hadn't spoken a word, but she'd drawn something in the ashes near the hearth. A round shield, split down the middle by a single vertical line, and a teardrop below it. Ruth stared at it long after the girl drifted off, her mind pacing the same tracks. That was no child running wild. That symbol meant something. Someone would come looking. The first hooves came just after dawn. Ruth was already out by the woodpile, shotgun balanced against her shoulder, when the dust began to rise from the western ridge. One rider, then another, then a third. In moments, the butte's spine swarmed with figures, still and silent, like spirits pulled from the rock itself. 70. They didn't shout, didn't approach, just waited, outlined against the burnt orange sky, spears glinting faintly in the sun's early eye. Ruth turned toward the cabin, heart steady but heavy. She opened the door. The girl was awake. Her gaze darted past Ruth to the window, then to the rifle leaning against the wall. But she didn't reach for it. She rose slowly, favoring her wounded leg, and limped past Ruth onto the porch. A tall man rode forward from the formation, paint stark across his face, horse black as storm-soaked coal. His eyes locked on Ruth, but he said nothing. The girl stepped forward, raised both hands, then knelt in the dirt. She pointed to her bandage, then to Ruth, then back to her own wound. The silence held like a drawn bow. Then the man dismounted. He crossed the yard slowly, wind tugging his braids. The others didn't move. Ruth didn't reach for her weapon. The man knelt before the girl, pressed his forehead to hers, then stood and turned to Ruth. They stood eye to eye. Ruth's lips were dry as sand. The man's face revealed nothing, but there was no hate in it. He placed one hand on her shoulder. A long breath passed between them. Then, without a word, he turned and raised a hand to the ridge. One by one, the riders vanished behind the hill like smoke curling from dying flame. The girl looked up at Ruth and smiled. The girl's voice rang sharp and fast in a language Ruth didn't know, hands gesturing with urgency. The chief listened without blinking. Behind him, the 70 warriors didn't flinch, didn't speak. Only the wind moved, rustling feathers, whispering through dry grass like a warning. Ruth stood alone, sleeves rolled, arms slack at her sides, not touching the rifle leaning against the porch post. The girl pointed again, first to her wound, then to Ruth's blood-soaked cloth, then the cot inside. The chief's jaw shifted. His eyes slid toward the cabin door, then back to Ruth. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. When he reached her, they stood inches apart. He raised a hand. Ruth didn't move. The hand landed not on her throat, but on her shoulder. A firm grip. Not violent, not gentle either. A moment passed, quiet and thick. Then he nodded once. Ruth exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. Behind the chief, a young scout thundered over the ridge, horse lathered and panting. He dismounted hard and ran straight to the chief, dropping to a knee. Words came out in fast Comanche, clipped and sharp. The chief's head turned west. The girl stiffened. Ruth didn't need a translation. Something was coming. The chief barked a command. Two of the warriors peeled off, riding low along the hills. Others adjusted their grips on bowstrings and reins. Ruth stepped off the porch. "What is it?" she asked, though she knew. The chief didn't answer, but the girl did. "Men," she said, her voice rough from silence. "Guns." Ruth looked past the ridge, where heat shimmered off the earth like a curtain. "How many?" The girl held up 5 fingers. Paused. Then 5 more. 10. Ruth's mouth pressed into a line. The chief turned to his warriors, gave a low order. They began to melt into the hills, silent as owls. Only the girl remained. Ruth turned and walked back to the cabin. The girl followed. Inside, Ruth opened a cedar chest by the hearth. Beneath old wool blankets and a Bible with a cracked spine, she lifted a long, oiled canvas roll. She unwrapped it carefully, fingers moving with memory. The Spencer rifle gleamed faint in the firelight. Still oiled, still loaded. "You should go," Ruth said, not looking up. The girl stood in the doorway. "I stay." "You got people." "I stay." Outside, a crow called once. Then nothing. Ruth slung the rifle over her shoulder, tied back her hair, and pulled on her old leather coat, the one with the bullet hole at the hip. She stepped outside again. The ridge was bare now. No trace of the warriors. But Ruth could feel them watching. The girl joined her on the porch, silent. A shimmer moved across the low valley. Dust. Hooves. The posse came into view. 10 men on horses, rifles slung, faces half covered with scars and hate. The lead rider wore a red bandana, pistol resting across his saddle horn like a warning. They didn't stop until they were 20 feet from Ruth's front gate. "Ma'am," the leader called, tipping his hat without warmth. "We heard you might be harboring a fugitive." Ruth didn't answer. She's young, brown-skinned, hair in braids. Ran off after gutting a man in Fort Chadbourne. He squinted. "A Comanche." Ruth said nothing. The man leaned forward. "We got a bounty writ signed and stamped by Judge Cotter. Anyone help in, her's a criminal." One of the others chuckled. "You got eyes in that cabin, ma'am." Ruth shifted her weight. "I got eyes on 10 thieves." The men tensed. The leader narrowed his eyes. "I'm guessing you've had a hard life. Widowed, maybe? Living out here alone. But harboring savages makes you a target." "I know what I am," Ruth said. The leader's smile turned crooked. "You aiming to die for a red girl you don't even know?" The girl stepped forward then, out from the shadow of the doorway. All 10 men saw her, saw the bandaged leg, saw the way she stood, unafraid. The leader raised his pistol. Ruth moved before he finished the motion. The Spencer cracked once. His hat flew off, bullets slicing the air an inch from his skull. "Next round don't miss," she said. The men scattered from their saddles, dropping behind rocks, shouting orders. Then came the answering sound, the soft hiss of arrows in the wind. 2 men dropped without even a scream. Chaos tore through the clearing. Gunfire erupted from the canyon walls. The Comanche had circled behind, flanking the bounty hunters. Ruth ducked behind her woodpile, working the lever on the Spencer smooth and fast, as if it had never left her hands. She caught one in the thigh, another in the shoulder. The rest scrambled for cover. One rider turned and bolted. The girl stepped to Ruth's side, picked up the second rifle from a porch. Ruth barked, "Stay down." The girl didn't listen. From the rocks, the lead bounty hunter staggered to his feet, pistol raised again, aimed at Ruth. The girl fired. He dropped like a sack of stone. Silence fell. Smoke drifted through the air, sharp with blood and gunpowder. The remaining bounty hunters lay sprawled or fled. Ruth lowered her rifle. The girl, hands still gripping the gun, trembled but stood tall. Across the ridge, the chief appeared once more. The warriors fanned out behind him, watching. Not one of them spoke. Ruth met the chief's gaze. Then she nodded once. The bullet tore through Ruth's left shoulder, spinning her backward into the porch post. Wood cracked. Her knees buckled. She hit the ground hard, dirt and blood clinging to her fingers as she crawled for the Spencer. A second shot rang out, splintering the post inches above her head. The last bounty hunter, scarred cheek, teeth bared, stood between the barn and the windmill, revolver raised, shouting wild. His comrades were dead or vanished. But he wasn't leaving empty-handed. "You're dead, old woman," he yelled. The girl was already moving. From behind the rain barrel, she sprinted low and fast, rifle clenched tight. Ruth shouted, "No," but her voice barely cleared her throat. The man turned toward the movement. Too slow. The girl fired. His revolver dropped from his hand. A red bloom spread across his chest. He stumbled, coughing, and dropped to his knees. Ruth watched him fall, dust puffing up around his boots. Silence again. Just the wind. And her own blood, warm, slicking down her arm. The girl rushed to her side, hands shaking. "You live," she said. "You stay." Ruth laughed once bitter. "That's my plan." By nightfall, the bodies were gone. The Comanche had returned to the ridge, vanishing like deer into dusk. The chief never approached, never spoke. But he left something at the edge of Ruth's porch, a small bundle wrapped in rawhide. Inside was a carved wooden feather and a strip of red cloth. Honor, trust, kin. She held it for a long while before placing it on the mantel beside her husband's tin star and the cracked photograph of them taken before the war. The next day, thunder echoed from the south. Not clouds, not storm, riders. Ruth stepped outside, shoulders stiff in a fresh wrap, Spencer loaded and leaning against the frame. The girl stood beside her again, no longer limping. Dust stretched for miles, swirling toward them like a living thing. 6 riders, maybe 7, moving fast, not bounty hunters. These rode with discipline. Ruth cursed under her breath. Law. By the time the riders reached her gate, Ruth already knew the man in front. Deputy Marshal Ethan Voss. Young, clean-shaven, mean as a rattler in church. He reined in hard and spat before speaking. "Hell of a mess you made, Ruth." "Didn't make it," she said, calm. "Just ended it." He motioned to his men. "Got witnesses, said you harbored a fugitive. Killed 4 men doing it. They came with guns drawn. Still bodies in the dirt. Still blood on your hands. You want to charge me? You go ahead," she said, stepping down from the porch. "But you bring enough rope." The girl stepped closer, jaw set. Voss looked at her, then back at Ruth. "That the Comanche girl?" Ruth didn't answer. He chuckled. "You really lost your damn mind. You think hiding behind ghost stories and war medals keeps you safe. I think I know the law better than you do." He dismounted, strolled slow. His hand rested on his holster. His eyes danced. "You think the war gave you the right to decide what's right and wrong?" he asked. "I think the war taught me what the difference looks like," she replied. He stopped inches away. "You're a traitor, Ruth." "No," she said. "I'm what comes after." The Spencer cracked. Not hers. From the ridge above, a shot rang like judgment. Voss staggered, hit in the leg, dropped to the ground with a scream. His men scattered, shouting. Another arrow landed at their feet, then a third. The Comanche weren't visible, but they were there, watching, waiting. Ruth walked forward, rifle in hand, past the writhing lawman. "You came here with arrogance," she said, voice low. "I stood with justice. Now ride home, Voss, while you still can." He spat blood. "You'll hang." She turned her back to him. "Then bring a ladder to hell." The girl helped her back to the porch. The lawmen left with their wounded. No arrests, no justice served their way. But Ruth knew it wasn't over. She sat by the window all night, rifle across her lap, watching the dark beyond the canyon. Somewhere far off, a drum beat once. Not a threat, a farewell, or maybe a promise. The rider came at dusk, fast and alone. Ruth saw the dust before she heard the hooves. No flag, no badge, just a figure draped in oilskin, rifle slung tight. He didn't stop at the gate, didn't speak, just tossed a parcel to the porch and wheeled his horse without a word. Inside the bundle, blood-stained canvas stamped with a marshal's seal. A note scrawled in a rush. Town turned. Boss dead. They're coming. Right now. Ruth stared at the handwriting. Not the deputies. Someone else. Someone trying to warn her. Behind her, the girl stood silent. Time to go, Ruth said. The girl didn't ask where. They left before full dark. No fire. No light. The wind howled through the canyon like it carried voices, some old, some not done speaking. By morning, the cabin sat empty. By noon, smoke rose from the hilltop. They'd burned it. All of it. Even a photograph. The girl never looked back. Weeks passed. Then stories. Then silence again. A trapper near Cimarron swore he saw a woman and a girl riding deep through the mountains, packs light, heads high. Said the woman wore a long coat and rode like a soldier. Said the girl laughed when the thunder cracked. In Bent Fork, a saloon keeper whispered about a lawman who came looking young, angry, asking questions. Next day, he rode out with 2 broken fingers and no answers. Some said Ruth died in the fire. Others said the Comanche took her, made her a sister of the plains. But most say she became something else. Years later, an old chief told a story by firelight. He spoke of a battle, long past, where a widow stood before 70 warriors and did not flinch, where she fought beside his people without asking for anything, where her guns spoke louder than her name, and her courage became a shield. He called her woman who stood alone, and beside him sat a woman with fire in her eyes and a scar on her leg, who said nothing but listened like she'd heard it all before. In a church ledger outside Silverton, her name is crossed out. Ruth Caraway, deceased, no kin, but carved into the wooden beam above the canyon's edge, faded by time and sun, are 4 letters scorched deep. R.L.W. Ruth Larkspur's War. Not forgotten, not forgiven, just legend now.